March 15, 1945. The war in Europe was entering its final, desperate weeks, though the women crowded into the cargo hold of the transport ship crossing the Atlantic didn't yet know this. They knew only hunger, exhaustion, and the bitter taste of defeat that no amount of seawater could wash away. Roswitha Baumann pressed her back against the cold metal wall of the ship, her baker's hands now rough and cracked from months without proper work. At 27, she had spent 3 years serving the Reich as a military baker, producing the dark, dense bread that sustained German troops across occupied Europe. She had taken pride in that work once, believing she was feeding soldiers who defended her homeland. Now, as an American prisoner of war bound for some unknown camp across the ocean, that pride had curdled into something she couldn't quite name. Around her, in the dim hold, 32 other German women sat in silence. They were what remained of the Women's Auxiliary Corps unit captured near the Belgian border during the Allied advance. Radio operators, nurses, administrative clerks, supply officers. Young women who had believed they were serving a righteous cause, now facing an uncertain future as enemies in a foreign land. Crystal Mahler, barely 22 with blonde hair, now dull from months without proper washing, sat beside Roswitha. The two had become close during their brief internment in England before this transatlantic crossing. Crystal had been a radio operator, her fingers once dancing across telegraph keys with practiced precision. Now those same fingers picked nervously at the frayed hem of her gray auxiliary uniform. "Do you think they'll kill us?" Crystal whispered in German, her voice barely audible above the ship's engines. Roswitha considered the question carefully. They had been treated correctly, if coldly, by British guards. Fed minimal rations, given basic medical care, processed through bureaucratic procedures, with mechanical efficiency. No one had struck them or threatened them, but no one had shown them kindness either. They were simply problems to be categorized and shipped elsewhere. "No," Roswitha finally answered. "Americans follow rules. We'll be imprisoned, probably put to work, but not killed." Across the hold, Gertrude Seidel, the eldest at 31, tended to a young woman burning with fever. Trudy had been a senior nurse, her medical skills desperately needed during the chaotic final months before capture. Now she worked with nothing but water and torn cloth, trying to bring comfort where she could provide no real treatment. The youngest among them, 19-year-old Laura Krauss, wept quietly in the corner. She had been an administrative clerk, comfortable behind a desk, utterly unprepared for the violence that had swept through their unit when Allied forces overran their position. Her youth made her tears somehow more heartbreaking. "What do you think America will be like?" Crystal asked. Roswitha closed her eyes, remembering the last real meal she had eaten before the deprivations began. The transport trucks rumbled through the gates of Camp Sheridan just after dawn on March 23, 1945. Roswitha glimpsed pine trees through the canvas covering, their green branches heavy with morning dew. After weeks at sea and days traveling across unfamiliar American landscape, the sight of trees felt almost dreamlike. The camp sat in rural Pennsylvania, far from any major city. As the trucks came to a stop and guards ordered the women out in heavily accented German, Roswitha's first impression was of space. So much space. The camp stretched across cleared land with neat rows of wooden barracks, administrative buildings, and tall wire fences that somehow seemed less oppressive than the cramped ship's hold they had left behind. Captain Vivian Ashford stood waiting as the German women assembled in uneven lines. She was perhaps 40, with steel-gray hair pinned severely beneath her officer's cap, and eyes that missed nothing. Her uniform was crisp, her bearing military, but something in her expression suggested more complexity than simple authority. "Welcome to Camp Sheridan," she said in clear English, waiting as a male interpreter translated. "You will be housed in Barracks C and D. You will follow all regulations, maintain discipline, and conduct yourselves appropriately. In return, you will be treated in accordance with the Geneva Convention. You will receive adequate food, medical care, and shelter. Adequate food, the words hung in the air. Roswitha couldn't remember the last time she had eaten anything that could be described as adequate. The ship rations had been minimal. Before that, the final months in Europe had been a slow descent into starvation, as supply lines collapsed and the Reich's infrastructure crumbled. The women were processed through intake procedures with bureaucratic efficiency. Names recorded, possessions inventoried, though they had almost nothing left. Medical examinations conducted by Lieutenant Ruth Callahan, a young doctor with gentle hands and tired eyes. She examined each woman carefully, making notes about malnutrition, untreated injuries, and the various ailments that came from months of deprivation. Roswitha's hands drew particular attention. Lieutenant Callahan turned them over, studying the cracks and calluses. "Baker?" she asked through the interpreter. "Yes," Roswitha answered, surprised to be seen as anything other than a prisoner number. The lieutenant nodded, making a note on her chart before moving on. The barracks were simple but clean. Wooden bunks with thin mattresses, gray blankets that smelled of soap, a wood stove for heat, windows let in actual sunlight. After the darkness of the ship's hold, the brightness felt almost painful. Crystal claimed the bunk above Roswitha's. "It's better than I expected," she whispered in German as the guards left them. To settle in. Trude, ever practical, was already organizing the limited space. "Don't get comfortable. We don't know what work they'll assign us or how long we'll be here." Laura sat on her bunk, still looking lost and overwhelmed. Outside, the smell of cooking drifted from somewhere across the camp. Roswitha's stomach cramped with sudden, sharp hunger. She tried to identify the scent but couldn't. It was something unfamiliar, something she had never encountered in all her years of baking. That first evening in Camp Sheridan, the 33 German women gathered in the barracks common area as Captain Ashford addressed them again. This time she spoke more slowly, allowing the interpreter to convey not just words but meaning. "You are here because you served military functions for an enemy nation," she began. "But you are also here because the United States believes in lawful treatment of prisoners. You will work. You will contribute to this camp's operation. In exchange, you will be fed, clothed, and housed appropriately. Work." The word offered something Roswitha hadn't expected: purpose. The weeks of passive transport, of being moved like cargo from one holding area to another, had been harder than she'd anticipated. Her hands needed occupation. Her mind needed distraction from thoughts she couldn't afford to examine too closely. The women were divided into work assignments based on their previous skills. Trudy and 2 other nurses were immediately assigned to the camp infirmary. Laura and the administrative clerks would work in the records office. Crystal and the radio operators were assigned to maintenance and cleaning duties, their technical skills irrelevant in captivity. When Roswitha identified herself as a baker, Captain Ashford's expression shifted slightly. "We have a kitchen staff shortage," she said through the interpreter, "but placing you there requires approval. For now, you'll work in the laundry." Roswitha nodded, understanding the unspoken concern. A baker had access to food, to supplies, to potential tools that could become weapons. Trust had to be earned. The dining hall that evening provided their first American meal. Roswitha sat between Crystal and Edeltraud Hoffman, a supply officer whose organizational skills had made her invaluable during their unit's chaotic final days. Trouty still maintained a military bearing that the others had begun to lose. Metal trays were distributed, and American kitchen workers served portions with mechanical efficiency. Roswitha stared at her tray in confusion. There was meat, actual meat, though she couldn't identify the cut or preparation. Potatoes, pale and mashed with butter that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Green beans, canned but abundant. White bread, soft and light, nothing like the dense, dark loaves she had once baked. "Is this real?" Crystal whispered in German. Around them, other women stared at their trays with similar disbelief. This wasn't minimal rations. This wasn't the thin soup and hard bread they had survived on for months. This was more food than Roswitha had seen on a single plate since 1943. Laura began to cry quietly, her fork trembling in her hand. "Eat," Trudy commanded softly, slowly. "Your stomachs aren't used to this." Roswitha took a small bite of the mashed potatoes. The butter, the salt, the creamy texture hit her tongue like a memory from another lifetime. She had to pause, had to close her eyes against the sudden emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. This was enemy food, served by enemy hands. But it was given freely, without cruelty, without the starvation rations that made every meal a reminder of defeat. The next morning began at 6 o'clock with the sound of a bell echoing across Camp Sheridan. Roswitha woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the unfamiliar ceiling of the American barracks came into focus. Around her, other women stirred, their movements slow and cautious as if they too needed time to remember their new reality. The laundry building sat at the eastern edge of the camp, a long wooden structure filled with industrial washing machines and drying lines. Roswitha reported there with 6 other German women, all of them uncertain what to expect. An American corporal, Daniel Morales, demonstrated the machines through gestures and simple commands. He was young, perhaps 25, with dark hair and patient brown eyes that held no obvious hostility. The work was hot, repetitive, and physically demanding. Roswitha spent hours feeding sheets and uniforms through the washing machines, hanging wet laundry on lines, folding dried items into precise military standards. Her baker's hands, accustomed to kneading dough, adapted quickly to the new labor. The mindless repetition provided what she needed most, distraction from thoughts that circled endlessly through her mind. During the lunch break, the laundry workers ate in a small room adjacent to the main building. Corporal Morales distributed sandwiches, each wrapped in waxed paper. Roswitha unwrapped hers carefully, studying the construction. White bread, thin sliced meat. She thought might be ham, yellow cheese, and a green leaf of lettuce. Simple, but more substantial than anything she had eaten in months. "Thank you," she said in careful English, one of the few phrases she knew. Corporal Morales nodded, his expression neutral but not unkind. "You're welcome." The other women ate in silence, aware that they were being observed. Private Francis Wong, a Chinese-American guard who monitored the laundry facility, stood near the door with his rifle held loosely. He seemed more bored than vigilant, occasionally glancing at a folded newspaper tucked into his belt. Roswitha noticed how the Americans moved through the camp with an ease she had never witnessed among German military personnel. They joked with each other, their interactions casual, despite clear rank structures. There was food everywhere, not hoarded or rationed, but simply available. She saw kitchen workers carrying boxes of supplies, guards eating apples as they walked their routes, administrative staff drinking coffee from ceramic mugs. This casual abundance disturbed her more than hostility would have. She had been taught that America was weak, soft, barely holding together under the strain of war. But what she witnessed suggested something different. A nation with resources so vast that even prison camps operated with surplus. That afternoon, Sergeant Walter Novak entered the laundry to inspect the work. He was a large man, perhaps 50, with graying hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent decades working with his hands. Sergeant Walter Novak walked through the laundry facility with the confidence of someone who knew every corner of Camp Sheridan. He was the head chef, Roswitha learned through whispered translations, responsible for feeding hundreds of soldiers and prisoners. His inspection had nothing to do with laundry and everything to do with observing the new German workers. He paused near Roswitha's station, watching her fold a stack of kitchen linens with practiced precision. Her movements were methodical, each fold exact, creating perfect rectangles that stacked uniformly. Baker's habits translated well to laundry work. "You fold like someone who's worked in kitchens," he said through Corporal Morales, who had been pulled in to translate. Roswitha hesitated, unsure if honesty would help or harm her situation. "I was a baker, 3 years, military bakeries. Sergeant Novak nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. He asked several questions through the translator: what kind of bread she made, how large were the ovens, what quantities she managed daily. Technical questions that revealed his own expertise. Finally, he grunted something to Corporal Morales and left. "He says you might be useful," the corporal translated. "But first you work here. Prove you follow rules." The days developed a rhythm. Wake at 6, work in the laundry until noon, lunch break, work until 5, dinner, evening hours in the barracks. The routine was mind-numbing but safe. Roswitha began to sleep through the nights without waking in panic, her body slowly accepting that immediate danger had passed. On the 5th day, something changed. Roswitha was hanging sheets on the drying lines when a scent drifted through the open windows. It stopped her mid-motion, the wet sheet forgotten in her hands. The smell was sweet, rich, complex. Cinnamon, she identified immediately, but also butter, sugar, vanilla. Something baking, something indulgent. Her eyes closed involuntarily. The scent transported her to childhood, to her grandmother's kitchen in Bavaria, to Sunday mornings, before the war, when such luxuries still existed. She hadn't smelled cinnamon in years. The spice had disappeared from German stores by 1942, reserved for military hospitals and high-ranking officials, if it existed at all. "What is that?" Crystal asked in German, appearing beside her with another basket of wet laundry. Her face held the same transported expression. Other German women had paused in their work, all of them drawn to the windows by that impossible scent. It drifted from the main kitchen building across the compound, carried on the morning breeze like a taunt or a promise. Roswitha forced herself back to work, but the scent lingered. It permeated the laundry building, mixing with the smell of soap and steam. Throughout the afternoon she found herself pausing, breathing deeply, trying to capture and hold that sweetness. It reminded her of everything she had lost: normal life, abundance, the simple pleasure of food, made for enjoyment rather than mere survival. That evening in the dining hall, the scent's source remained invisible. The prisoners received their standard portions: meat, vegetables, potatoes. Good food, adequate food, but nothing sweet. Sunday morning arrived with unexpected developments. Captain Ashford announced through interpreters that prisoners who had demonstrated good behavior would receive additional privileges. Mail would be permitted, supervised letters to and from Germany through the International Red Cross. Work assignments might be adjusted based on skills and camp needs. Small personal items could be purchased from the camp commissary with earned credits. The news created cautious optimism among the German women. Connection to home, however tenuous, offered hope that someone somewhere might have survived. Roswitha thought of her mother in Hamburg, her 2 younger sisters. She had received no word from them since her capture. The not knowing created a hollow space in her chest that food couldn't fill. After breakfast, Sergeant Novak appeared in the dining hall and approached the table where the German women sat. Through Corporal Morales, he addressed Roswitha directly. Captain Ashford approved a trial assignment. You work in the kitchen starting tomorrow. Supervised. Restricted duties. You follow every instruction exactly. Roswitha stood quickly, nearly knocking over her water glass. Yes, thank you. I will work hard. The sergeant studied her for a long moment, his weathered face revealing nothing. Then he nodded and left. That afternoon, Mrs. Mildred Thornton arrived at the camp. She was a Red Cross volunteer, perhaps 60 years old, with white hair and gentle eyes that held genuine kindness. She came weekly to assist with prisoner correspondence, helping women compose letters in English that might have better chances of reaching Germany through official channels. Roswitha sat across from her at a scarred wooden table, struggling to find words for the letter she needed to write. Start with simple facts, Mrs. Thornton suggested through the interpreter. Your mother will want to know you're safe. Dear Mama, Roswitha began, and Mrs. Thornton wrote in careful English, script. I am alive. I am in America, in a prison camp, but I am treated fairly. I have food and shelter. Are you alive? Are Emma and Sophie alive? Please write to me if you can. I think of you every day." The letter felt inadequate, unable to contain the complex reality of her situation. How could she explain that her captors fed her better than her own country had in the final year of the war? That Americans showed her more humanity than she had witnessed in many German military installations? Mrs. Thornton sealed the letter in an envelope, marking it with the proper Red Cross protocols. "Mail is slow," she warned. "It may be months before you receive a reply, if you receive one at all. Germany is in chaos." That evening, Roswitha lay in her bunk, staring at the wooden ceiling. Tomorrow she would work in a kitchen again. Her hands would return to familiar work, even if the context had changed completely. The thought both comforted and disturbed her. Crystal climbed into the bunk above. "Roswitha, are you nervous about tomorrow?" "Yes." "Why did that sergeant choose you?" "Because he needs a baker, and because maybe he sees that I just want to work, not cause problems." "What if they don't trust you?" "Then I'll earn their trust." Monday morning, Roswitha reported to the main kitchen at 5:30, half an hour before the rest of the camp stirred. The building was already alive with activity. Sergeant Novak stood near the industrial ovens, reviewing preparation lists with Corporal Morales. Two other American kitchen workers, both privates she didn't recognize, worked at different stations preparing breakfast for 300 people. Sergeant Novak handed her a white apron and a cap to cover her hair. Through Corporal Morales, he explained the rules. "You work only at stations I assign. You touch nothing without permission. You ask questions before acting. Private Wong will be nearby at all times." Private Wong nodded from his position by the door, rifle slung over his shoulder. His presence was meant to be intimidating, but Roswitha felt only relief. Clear rules, clear expectations. She could work within those boundaries. Her first task was simple: peeling potatoes. Mountains of them, destined for breakfast hash. Her hands moved automatically, the peeler becoming an extension of her fingers. It was mindless work, but being in a kitchen again felt like returning to herself after months of being lost. As she worked, she observed everything. The Americans used ingredients with casual abundance that made her chest ache. Butter measured in pounds, not rations. Eggs by the dozen. Milk in large metal containers. Sugar sat in massive bags on storage shelves, more sugar than she had seen in 3 years. Sugar had become a memory in Germany by 1942. First rationed, then reserved for military and medical use, then simply absent. Roswitha remembered the last cake she had baked with real sugar, a birthday torte for a colonel's daughter in 1943. She had hoarded the precious ration for weeks, knowing such opportunities wouldn't come again. Here, Americans used sugar in coffee without thought. They sweetened oatmeal, baked desserts, created abundance from abundance. Sergeant Novak worked with practiced efficiency, orchestrating the kitchen like a conductor leading an orchestra. He moved between stations, adjusting seasonings, checking temperatures, correcting techniques with brief words and demonstrations. Roswitha recognized mastery when she saw it. This man had spent decades perfecting his craft. Around 8 o'clock, after breakfast service ended, the sergeant approached her station. She had peeled every potato without complaint, the pile of clean tubers testament to her efficiency. "Tomorrow, you work the bread station," he said through Corporal Morales. "Standard military loaves. I show you our recipes and methods. You follow exactly." Roswitha nodded, trying to contain her relief. Bread was familiar territory, even if American methods might differ from German techniques. The sergeant paused, studying her with those unreadable eyes. "You were Wehrmacht baker." "Yes, 3 years. Mostly dark rye, some wheat when supplies permitted. Dark rye is good bread, honest bread." He said something else in English that the corporal didn't translate, then returned to his work. That afternoon, Roswitha's hands cramped from the unfamiliar peeling motion. But the ache felt purposeful, earned. She had contributed something useful. In the chaos of defeat and captivity, that small purpose mattered more than she could explain. Tuesday morning brought Roswitha to the bread station. Sergeant Novak had already prepared the workspace, massive mixing bowls, industrial-sized bags of flour, containers of yeast, measuring implements scaled for institutional cooking. The setup was familiar despite being American. Bread was bread, requiring the same fundamental elements regardless of nationality. The sergeant demonstrated his technique through action rather than excessive translation. His hands moved through the dough with confidence born from repetition. Roswitha watched carefully, noting differences from German military methods. Americans used more fat in their dough, added milk where Germans used only water, preferred lighter textures over dense nutrition. When he stepped back, gesturing for her to begin, Roswitha approached the mixing bowl with reverence. Her hands sank into flour for the first time in months. The sensation was profound, almost spiritual. This was her craft, her identity. The skill that defined her before the war redefined everything. She measured ingredients according to his specifications, her movements precise. Flour, water, yeast, salt, a shocking amount of butter. Her hands began kneading, finding the rhythm that her body remembered even when her mind struggled with everything else. The dough responded, transforming from shaggy mass into smooth, elastic promise. Sergeant Novak watched without comment. Corporal Morales stood nearby, ready to translate if needed, but the sergeant seemed content to observe. Roswitha felt his assessment like physical weight, understanding that this moment determined her value in this kitchen. She shaped the dough into standard military loaves, her hands creating uniform sizes through practiced estimation. Each loaf received the same attention, the same care. This was how she had worked in German bakeries, with precision, with pride, with the understanding that soldiers depended on her craft for sustenance. While the loaves underwent their first rise, the sergeant gestured toward a different station. Large sheet pans waited there, along with ingredients that made Roswitha's breath catch: flour, sugar, butter, cinnamon, the components of something she hadn't made in years. "Special order," Corporal Morales translated. "Officers' mess wants cinnamon rolls for Thursday breakfast. Sergeant says you watch today, help tomorrow. Make them yourself by next week if you prove capable." Roswitha nodded, unable to trust her voice. Cinnamon rolls. The scent that had haunted her days ago had a source, and now she was being invited into its creation. Sergeant Novak began the demonstration. His technique was different from traditional German methods, more indulgent, emphasizing sweetness over substance. He rolled dough thin, spread it with softened butter, showered it with cinnamon and sugar mixture in quantities that seemed impossible. The rolls were shaped, placed in pans, left to rise into puffy spirals. When they baked, the kitchen filled with that intoxicating scent. Roswitha stood at her bread station, pretending to work while her entire being focused on those cinnamon rolls transforming in the oven. The smell triggered that memory so powerful she had to grip the counter for stability. Her grandmother's kitchen. Sunday mornings. Warmth and safety and abundance before the world fell apart. The timer rang. Sergeant Novak removed the rolls, each one golden and perfect. While they cooled slightly, he prepared glaze, powdered sugar, milk, vanilla. Sergeant Novak drizzled white glaze over the warm cinnamon rolls with practiced ease. The sweet icing melted slightly, running into the spirals and creating pools of sugary perfection. Roswitha watched from her station, trying to maintain professional focus while her body betrayed her with physical hunger that transcended mere emptiness. The sergeant cut a single roll from the corner of the pan. Steam rose from the exposed interior, revealing layers of cinnamon sugar swirled through tender dough. He placed it on a small plate, added a fork, and crossed to where Roswitha stood. Through Corporal Morales, he said simply, "You taste. You cannot make what you don't understand." Roswitha stared at the plate. This wasn't prisoner rations. This was the officer's special order, meant for American command staff, not for enemy captives. Her hands trembled as she accepted the plate. "Sergeant Novak," she managed in her careful English, "I cannot. This is not for prisoners." The sergeant's weathered face remained impassive. "You are a kitchen worker now. Kitchen workers must know the food they make. This is not gift. This is training. Eat." She sat on a nearby stool, fork gripped in her unsteady hand. The other kitchen workers had paused their tasks, watching this unexpected moment. Private Wong shifted his rifle slightly but said nothing. The entire kitchen seemed to hold its breath. Roswitha cut a small piece with the fork. The roll separated easily, revealing its tender structure. She raised the bite to her mouth, and the moment it touched her tongue, something inside her shattered. The sweetness overwhelmed her, not just sugar, but layers of flavor. Butter, cinnamon, vanilla, the complex notes of properly developed dough. It was warm, soft, rich, beyond anything she had tasted in 4 years. Her eyes closed. Involuntarily, as her mind tried to process sensation it had nearly forgotten existed. A tear escaped, running down her cheek before she could stop it. Then another. Her shoulders began to shake as she took a second bite, unable to prevent the emotional response. This wasn't just food. This was everything the war had stolen: comfort, abundance, the simple human pleasure of something made beautiful rather than merely functional. "I'm sorry," she whispered in German, then again in English. "I'm sorry I haven't tasted sugar in years. Real sugar used like this." Corporal Morales translated, though her tears needed no interpretation. Around the kitchen, the American workers exchanged glances. Private Wong looked away, his expression uncomfortable. Even Sergeant Novak's impassive facade cracked slightly, something that might have been compassion flickering across his weathered features. Roswitha forced herself to eat slowly, to savor rather than devour. Each bite was a revelation, reminding her body what pleasure felt like. She had become so accustomed to eating for survival that she had forgotten food could be joyful. When she finished, she set down the fork and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Thank you, Sergeant Novak. I understand now what you want me to create. I will learn your methods." The sergeant nodded once, then returned to his work. The kitchen resumed its normal rhythm, but something had shifted. Roswitha had been seen not as an enemy or a prisoner, but as a craftsperson being taught her trade. The days that followed established a new pattern in Roswitha's life. She arrived at the kitchen before dawn, worked until mid-afternoon, then returned to the barracks where other German women asked endless questions about her privileged position. Some showed genuine curiosity. Others, like Edeltraud Hoffmann, viewed her kitchen access with suspicion that bordered on hostility. "You're becoming too comfortable with them," Trouty said one evening as they sat in the barracks common area. "You forget we're prisoners, that these people are our enemies." Roswitha looked up from the English primer Mrs. Thornton had given her. "I forget nothing, but I choose to work well and cause no trouble. What purpose does hostility serve?" "Pride," Trouty snapped. "Loyalty to our country." "Our country," Roswitha said quietly, "put us in situations where we were captured and left us with nothing. These Americans feed us better than Germany did in the final year. What loyalty do I owe to a system that collapsed?" The conversation ended tensely, revealing the divisions forming among the prisoners. Some, like Trouty, maintained rigid military identity despite their circumstances. Others, like Roswitha and Crystal, had begun the complicated process of reassessing everything they had believed. In the kitchen, trust developed through incremental steps. Sergeant Novak allowed Roswitha to work with less supervision. She proved reliable, following instructions precisely, asking questions when uncertain, never attempting to access areas outside her assigned duties. Private Wong spent less time actively watching her and more time reading his newspaper nearby. Corporal Morales began teaching her English during slower kitchen moments. "You need words," he explained. "Sergeant Novak won't always have translator available. You must understand instructions directly." The lessons were practical, focused on kitchen terminology and common phrases. Roswitha absorbed the language hungrily, recognizing that communication offered power in her powerless situation. Within 2 weeks, she could understand most of the sergeant's instructions without translation. Thursday arrived with the special officer's order, cinnamon rolls for breakfast. This time, Sergeant Novak positioned Roswitha as his assistant rather than observer. She measured ingredients under his supervision, mixed the enriched dough, kneaded it to proper consistency. Her hands remembered techniques from before the war, adapted them to American methods. When time came to roll and fill the dough, the sergeant stepped back. "You do? I watch." Roswitha's heart hammered as she rolled the dough into a rectangle. Her hands worked carefully, spreading softened butter edge to edge, distributing cinnamon sugar mixture evenly. She rolled the dough into a tight spiral, her movements precise. The cylinder was cut into uniform pieces, each one placed in the prepared pans. Sergeant Novak examined her work, adjusting 2 rolls slightly. "Good. You learn quick." He said something else in English, and Corporal Morales translated. "He says you have baker's hands, honest hands." While the rolls rose and baked, Roswitha worked on regular bread production. But her attention remained on those cinnamon rolls, monitoring their progress through the oven's window. When Sergeant Novak removed them golden and perfect, she felt pride she hadn't experienced in months. 3 weeks into her kitchen assignment, Roswitha received her first letter from Germany. Captain Ashford delivered it personally during morning formation, her expression grave. The envelope was battered, forwarded through multiple Red Cross stations, bearing stamps from 4 different countries. Roswitha waited until evening to open it in the barracks. Her hands shook as she unfolded the thin paper. Crystal sat beside her, offering silent support. The letter was from her younger sister Emma, written in February nearly 2 months ago. "Dear Roswitha," it began, "I hope this reaches you. I hope you are alive. Mama is gone. The bombing in January took her and half our neighborhood. I found her in the rubble 3 days later. Sophie and I survived because we were in the countryside searching for food. Hamburg is destroyed. There is nothing left of our street, our home, anything we knew." The words blurred as tears filled Roswitha's eyes. Her mother, the woman who had taught her to bake, who had kissed. Her goodbye when she joined the Auxiliary Corps, believing her daughter was serving a noble cause. Gone. "Sophie and I are living in the countryside with Aunt Hilda," the letter continued. "We have little food. The authorities say the war will end soon, that Germany will surrender. Everyone is starving and cold. I do not know what will happen to us. If you are alive, if you can, please stay where you are. There is nothing here to come back to. Germany is dead." Crystal read the letter over Roswitha's shoulder, her own tears falling freely. Around the barracks, other women had received letters bearing similar news. The sound of weeping filled the space as the reality of their homeland's destruction became concrete rather than abstract. Trudy moved through the barracks offering what comfort she could, her nurse's instincts overwhelming her military rigidity. Even Trouty seemed shaken, though she had received no letter and had no way of knowing if her family survived. That night, Roswitha couldn't sleep. Her mother's face haunted her thoughts. She had believed capture was the worst thing that could happen. She had been wrong. The worst thing was surviving while everyone she loved perished. Morning arrived gray and cold. Roswitha reported to the kitchen mechanically, her body moving through familiar routines while her mind remained trapped in Hamburg's ruins. Sergeant Novak noticed immediately. He said nothing at first, allowing her to work in silence. But when she fumbled a simple task, measuring flour incorrectly, he stopped her. "Corporal," he called to Morales, "ask her what happened." Through halting English and the corporal's translation, Roswitha explained. The letter, her mother, the destruction of everything she had known. The words came out flat, emotionless, as if speaking about someone else's tragedy. Sergeant Novak listened without interruption. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "War takes everything from everyone. German, American, doesn't matter. We all lose people we love." He paused, then added through translation, Your mother would want you to keep living, keep working, honor her by surviving well." The simple words broke something open in Roswitha's chest. She nodded, unable to speak, and returned to her work with tears streaming down her face. But her hands moved correctly now, measuring and mixing with precision. Working through grief was something she understood. April brought warmer weather and unexpected changes to Camp Sheridan. News filtered in of Allied advances deep into Germany, of Soviet forces approaching Berlin, of the inevitable collapse now obvious to everyone. Among the German prisoners, this news created complex reactions. Relief that the war would end mixed with dread about what defeat would mean for their destroyed country. In the kitchen, Roswitha had earned enough trust for expanded responsibilities. Sergeant Novak assigned her the complete bread production, mixing, kneading, shaping, baking, all without direct supervision. Private Wong still maintained presence, but from a distance, his attention more on his newspaper than on her activities. The work became meditation, a way to process grief that had no other outlet. Her hands moved through dough, while her mind circled endlessly around her mother's death, her sister's suffering, the magnitude of loss that seemed too large to comprehend. Bread couldn't bring her mother back, but creating something nourishing from basic ingredients offered small purpose in purposeless circumstances. Corporal Morales had become more than a translator. He talked with her during breaks, sharing stories about his family in New Mexico, his mother's cooking, his hopes for after the war. His kindness was casual, uncalculated, the natural friendliness of someone who saw people rather than categories. "My mother makes tortillas every morning," he told her one afternoon while they worked side by side preparing vegetables. "Fresh, hot, perfect. She'd probably like you. She respects anyone who understands bread." The casual inclusion in his thoughts about future and family struck Roswitha as profound. He spoke to her as if she were a person with a future worth considering, not an enemy prisoner whose fate remained uncertain. One morning, Sergeant Novak announced a special requirement. "General inspection next week. Command wants demonstration of camp efficiency. Kitchen will prepare special meal. You make cinnamon rolls." Enough for inspection committee. Roswitha's stomach tightened. This wasn't routine officer's breakfast. This was performance under scrutiny, her work representing the kitchen's capabilities. Success could mean continued trust. Failure could mean return to laundry duty. She spent 2 days practicing, making small batches to perfect technique. The sergeant watched critically, adjusting her methods with brief corrections. "More butter in the filling, roll tighter, space them closer for softer edges." Each instruction refined her approach, bringing her closer to his exacting standards. On practice day 3, she produced a batch that made Sergeant Novak pause. He examined the rolls carefully, testing texture, checking even browning, tasting a corner piece. Finally he nodded. "Good. You make them this way for inspection." The night before inspection, Roswitha lay awake reviewing every step. Crystal asked if she was nervous. "Terrified," Roswitha admitted. "Everything I've earned here depends on those rolls being perfect." "They will be," Crystal assured her. "You're the best baker I've ever known." "I'm the only baker you've ever known." "That doesn't make it less true." Despite her anxiety, Roswitha smiled. Crystal's friendship had become anchor in chaos, reminding her that human connection survived even when everything else fell apart. Whatever happened with the inspection, she was grateful for that gift. Inspection day arrived with unusual tension throughout Camp Sheridan. German prisoners were confined to barracks except for essential work assignments. American personnel moved with heightened formality, uniforms pressed to perfection, every aspect of camp operation prepared for scrutiny. The inspection committee consisted of 3 colonels from regional command and 2 War Department officials evaluating POW camp management. Roswitha reported to the kitchen at 4 a.m, 2 hours earlier than usual. Sergeant Novak was already there, organizing every element of the demonstration meal. The menu included roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh bread, and cinnamon rolls for dessert. Everything had to be perfect. "You focus only on rolls," the sergeant instructed. "I handle everything else. You start when I tell you. You finish when they're glazed and perfect." Roswitha nodded, too nervous to trust her voice. She had laid out all ingredients the night before, measuring and remeasuring to ensure accuracy. Her hands felt clumsy as she began the dough, mixing and kneading with movements that should have been automatic but felt foreign under pressure. Sergeant Novak worked 3 stations away, orchestrating the meal with practiced efficiency. Corporal Morales and another private managed vegetables and sides. Private Wong maintained his usual position, though today he stood straighter, more obviously vigilant. The kitchen hummed with focused activity. The dough came together properly despite Roswitha's nerves. She shaped it into a ball, covered it, set it aside to rise. While waiting, she prepared the filling. Butter softened to perfect spreading consistency, cinnamon and sugar mixed in precise proportions. Her grandmother had taught her that cinnamon rolls required patience and attention. Rushing produced mediocre results. When the dough had risen sufficiently, she rolled it on the floured surface. Her hands steadied as familiar work took over, muscle memory overriding anxiety. The rectangle formed evenly, edges straight, thickness uniform. She spread butter, distributed cinnamon sugar, rolled the dough into a tight spiral. Each motion felt like prayer. The rolls were cut, arranged in pans, left to rise again. While they puffed into their final form, Roswitha prepared the glaze. Powdered sugar, milk, vanilla extract, measured carefully. The glaze had to be perfect, thick enough to coat, but thin enough to drip beautifully into the spirals. Sergeant Novak checked her progress without comment, but something in his expression suggested approval. The rolls went into the oven at precisely calculated temperature. Roswitha stood watching through the oven window as they baked, transformed by heat from pale dough into golden pastry. The inspection committee arrived at 1100 hours. Captain Ashford led them through the facility, explaining camp operations and prisoner management protocols. They reached the kitchen as Sergeant Novak was plating the demonstration meal. The timing was perfect, calculated to show food at its peak. Roswitha stood at attention near her station as the officials entered. She kept her eyes forward, trying to be invisible, despite her German auxiliary uniform marking her obviously as prisoner rather than staff. One of the colonels paused, noticing her. "Sergeant Novak, is that a German prisoner working in your kitchen?" "Yes, sir. Former Wehrmacht baker. 3 years experience. She's proven reliable and skilled." The colonel's eyebrows rose. "Interesting approach. Does she understand English?" Sergeant Novak gestured for Roswitha to answer. Her heart pounded as she responded in careful English. "Yes, sir. I understand basic English. I follow all instructions. I work hard to help kitchen." The colonel studied Roswitha with an expression she couldn't interpret. "What's your name?" "Roswitha Baumann, sir. I was baker for Wehrmacht 3 years. Now I work here." "And you made these cinnamon rolls?" "Yes, sir, under Sergeant Novak's supervision and instruction." The colonel selected one of the rolls from the display platter, examining it closely before taking a bite. The room fell silent as he chewed thoughtfully. Roswitha's heart hammered so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. "Exceptional," he finally declared. "Light texture, perfect sweetness, excellent technique." He turned to Sergeant Novak. "You've trained her well." "She came with skill, sir. I just taught her American methods." The inspection committee sampled the complete meal, making notes and asking questions about procurement, preparation times, and kitchen efficiency. They seemed particularly interested in the integration of prisoner labor, questioning Captain Ashford extensively about security protocols and work assignment procedures. After they departed, Sergeant Novak approached Roswitha's station. "You did well." They were impressed. Relief flooded through her so intensely she had to grip the counter. "Thank you, Sergeant, for the opportunity, for teaching me, for trusting." "Me? You earned trust. That's different from being given it." The rest of the day passed in exhausted relief. When Roswitha returned to the barracks that evening, other prisoners crowded around asking questions. Word had spread about the inspection, about her role, about the American officials praising German prisoners' work. Trouty stood apart, her expression dark. "You performed for them like a trained animal. You should be ashamed." Roswitha met her gaze steadily. "I worked with skill. I spent years developing. I created something beautiful. I see no shame in that." "You serve our enemies. I serve my own survival. Germany gave us nothing but destruction. These Americans give us food, shelter, dignity. Where is the shame in accepting that?" The confrontation drew a line between prisoners who clung to old identities and those willing to adapt to new realities. Crystal, Laura, and several others sided with Roswitha. Trouty and a small group maintained rigid military loyalty to a country that no longer existed in any recognizable form. That night, Roswitha wrote to her sisters. She told them about the kitchen work, about learning English, about Americans who treated her as person rather than enemy. She didn't mention the cinnamon rolls specifically, knowing such abundance would seem impossible or cruel given their starvation. "I am surviving," she wrote. "More than surviving. I am learning that people can be kind even when they have every reason to hate. I hope you are finding similar kindness wherever you are. I hope we will see each other again when this is finally over." She sealed the letter, knowing months might pass before it reached Germany, if it reached them at all. But the act of writing connected her to family, to past, to the person she had been before the war, transformed everything. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. The announcement came through camp speakers just after breakfast. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. American personnel erupted in celebration. Cheering echoed across Camp Sheridan as soldiers embraced, wept, shouted their relief that the killing had finally ended. In the German barracks, the response was silence. Heavy, complicated, unbearable silence. Roswitha sat on her bunk, trying to process what surrender meant. Germany defeated completely. The Reich destroyed. Everything she had believed about her country's strength and righteousness, proven false. She had known this moment was coming, but experiencing it felt different from anticipating it. Around her, other women reacted differently. Some wept. Others sat in stunned shock. Trouty maintained rigid military bearing, refusing to show emotion even as her world collapsed. Crystal simply stared at the wall, her face blank. Captain Ashford addressed the prisoners that afternoon. "The war in Europe has ended. Your country has surrendered. Repatriation procedures will begin soon. You will be returned to Germany to face whatever future awaits there." Return to Germany, to rubble and starvation, to sisters who might or might not still be alive, to a country that had become unrecognizable. Roswitha felt no joy at the prospect of going home because home no longer existed. That evening, she reported to the kitchen as usual, unsure if work would continue normally. Sergeant Novak was there, his expression thoughtful. The celebration among American staff had subsided into quieter relief, the exhaustion of years finally permitting itself to surface. "War is over," he said simply. "You will go home soon." "Home," Roswitha repeated in English. "I have no home. Hamburg is destroyed. My mother is dead. My sisters starve in the countryside. What home do I return to?" The sergeant was quiet for a long moment. "War destroys everyone's home. Germans, Americans, doesn't matter. We all have to rebuild from ashes." They worked side by side, preparing evening meal, the familiar routine offering comfort. In chaos, other kitchen staff moved quietly, the day's emotions too complex for normal banter. Private Wong read his newspaper without his usual casual humor. Corporal Morales approached to Roswitha during a break. "What will you do when you go back?" "I don't know. Find my sisters if they're alive. Try to survive somehow. There is no work, no food, nothing in Germany now." "I'm sorry. That must be terrifying." The simple acknowledgement of her fear offered without judgment or platitude, nearly broke her composure. Yes, terrifying. Over the following days, discussions among German prisoners grew intense and desperate. Repatriation meant facing unknown dangers in a devastated homeland. Some women had received no letters from Germany and had no idea if anyone they loved still lived. Others, like Roswitha, knew they were returning to nothing. "What if we could stay?" Crystal whispered one night. "What if we asked to remain here instead of returning?" "That's impossible," Laura said. "We're prisoners of war. They'll send us back. But what if we asked? What's the worst that could happen? They say no, and we go home anyway?" The radical idea circulated quietly through the barracks, growing from desperate hope into genuine possibility. The idea of requesting to stay in America grew from whispered possibility to serious consideration. Roswitha found herself at the center of these discussions, her kitchen position and improved English making her the natural spokesperson. The prospect terrified and excited her in equal measure. "We would need to present our case carefully," she told the small group gathered in the barracks. Crystal, Laura, Trudy, and 5 others who had nothing to return to in Germany. "We must explain why returning would be dangerous, why we wish to stay, what we could contribute here." Trouty overheard and exploded with anger. "You would betray Germany completely? Beg to stay with our enemies? You disgrace everything we fought for." "We fought for nothing," Roswitha replied quietly. "We served a regime that destroyed our own country. I will not apologize for wanting to survive." The division among prisoners became absolute. Most would accept repatriation, facing Germany's ruins with whatever courage they could muster, but 9 women, led by Roswitha, decided to request permission to remain in America. They composed a letter to Captain Ashford, each woman signing it. Roswitha's improving English shaped the careful words. "We respectfully request consideration to remain in the United States rather than immediate repatriation to Germany. We have no families to return to, no homes, no means of survival. We wish to contribute through work, to earn our place here, to build new lives in a country that has shown us unexpected humanity." Captain Ashford received the letter with visible surprise. She called Roswitha to her office 2 days later. "This is an unprecedented request. I'm not certain it's even legally possible. We understand, Captain, but we must try. Germany offers us only death, either quick from starvation or slow from despair." The captain studied her thoughtfully. "You've changed since arriving here. All of you have. I've watched German prisoners in other camps. Most maintain hostility throughout captivity. Your group has adapted, learned, integrated. Why?" Roswitha considered the question carefully. "Because we discovered that everything we were taught about Americans was false. We expected cruelty and found kindness. We expected hatred and found opportunities for redemption. We learned that enemies can become something else when both sides choose humanity over hatred." The captain nodded slowly. "I'll forward your request through proper channels, but understand this may take months to resolve. The bureaucracy of peace is slower than the bureaucracy of war." In the kitchen, Sergeant Novak had heard about the request. "You want to stay in America?" "Yes, Sergeant, if permitted." "Why? Your country needs rebuilding. Skilled people like you could help." "My country destroyed itself. I owe it nothing. But here I have found work I value, people who treat me fairly, the possibility of a future. Is that not worth requesting?" The sergeant was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "If you stay, you'll need sponsor. Someone to vouch for you, help you establish yourself. I could do that, if it comes to it." The bureaucratic process moved with glacial slowness through summer and into autumn. The 9 German women who had requested to stay remained at Camp Sheridan in a strange limbo, no longer quite prisoners, but not yet free. Other German POWs had been repatriated in waves throughout June and July, returning to a divided and occupied Germany. Trouty left without saying goodbye, her contempt for those staying evident in her rigid silence. Others departed with mixed emotions, carrying letters from the remaining women to deliver if they somehow found their families. The barracks grew emptier, quieter, haunted by absence. Roswitha continued her kitchen work, now essential rather than experimental. With many American personnel discharged and returning to civilian life, the camp needed her skills. Sergeant Novak had formally requested her retention as paid employee rather than prisoner, pending resolution of her immigration status. In September, official word finally arrived. The 9 women would be reclassified as displaced persons and granted provisional work permits while their immigration applications processed. They would need sponsors, employment, and community support to transition from prisoner status to potential citizenship. Sergeant Novak made good on his promise, sponsoring Roswitha and helping her secure employment at a civilian bakery in the nearby town. Mrs. Thornton helped Crystal find work as a seamstress. Lieutenant Callahan arranged for Trudy to continue nursing training. Each woman found Americans willing to offer second chances. The transition was terrifying. After months of structured captivity, suddenly being responsible for their own housing, finances, and futures felt overwhelming. Roswitha rented a small room above the bakery where she worked, her first independent living space in years. The freedom was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. She wrote to her sisters with her new address, explaining her decision to remain in America. "I know you may not understand. You may think I abandoned you and Germany. But I am building a life here that honors Mama's memory by surviving well rather than merely surviving. When Germany is stable again, perhaps you can join me here. Until then, know that I think of you daily." Winter arrived, bringing her first American Christmas as a free woman. The bakery owner, Mr. Henderson, invited her to his family's celebration. She sat at their table, surrounded by strangers who treated her with warmth, eating food she had helped prepare, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years: belonging. In the spring of 1946, Sergeant Novak visited the bakery. He was retiring from military service, returning to his family's restaurant in Ohio. "You've done well," he told her, examining the display case filled with her creations. German rye bread sat alongside American cinnamon rolls, her past and present coexisting in baked form. "You taught me well, Sergeant. I will always be grateful." "You taught yourself. I just showed you it was possible." He paused, then added, "Stay good, Roswitha. Keep making honest bread. That's all any of us can do." 25 years later, in 1970, Roswitha stood in her own bakery in Philadelphia. The small storefront had grown into a successful business, known throughout the neighborhood for its unique combination of German and American baking traditions. Regular customers came for her rye bread and stayed for her cinnamon rolls, never knowing the history those pastries carried. She had become an American citizen in 1952, married a kind accountant named Robert in 1954, raised 2 daughters who knew their mother's history but couldn't quite comprehend the journey she had traveled. Her English was flawless now, though German accent remained, softened by decades but never entirely disappearing. Her sisters had survived the post-war years in Germany. Emma had married and remained there, building a new life in a transformed country. Sophie had joined Roswitha in America in 1958, finding work as a translator. They saw each other weekly, 2 women who had survived impossible circumstances through different paths. Crystal had settled in Boston, working as a master seamstress and marrying an Irish police officer. They visited twice yearly, their friendship forged in captivity, now deepened by shared history and mutual respect. Trudy had become a surgical nurse, never marrying, dedicating her life to healing as atonement for serving a regime that had caused so much harm. Of the 9 women who had chosen to stay, all had built successful lives in America. Their story had become local legend, occasionally featured in newspaper articles about the unique redemption narratives that followed World War II. Reporters always asked the same question: why had they chosen to stay? Roswitha's answer evolved over the years but maintained its essential truth. We discovered that home isn't where you're born. It's where you choose to build a life that honors the best in human nature. On this particular morning, a young German exchange student entered the bakery. She ordered a cinnamon roll, and Roswitha prepared it with the same care she had learned from Sergeant Novak 25 years earlier. The girl bit into it, her eyes widening with pleasure. "This is perfect," she said in accented English, "like my grandmother used to make in Germany." Roswitha smiled, remembering another girl who had tasted cinnamon rolls for the first time in an American prison camp, who had wept at the unexpected sweetness. "It's an old recipe, given to me by someone who believed that food could bridge differences between people." The girl left happy, unaware she had been served by a woman whose life had been saved by the simple act of sharing sweetness with an enemy. Roswitha watched her go, then returned to her work, mixing dough with the same practiced motions she had performed for decades: flour, water, yeast, salt, butter, sugar, cinnamon. Simple ingredients that had somehow contained the possibility of redemption. She had learned in that prison camp kitchen that transformation was possible when people chose kindness over hatred, when they saw humanity in enemies, when they offered second chances to those willing to earn them. The legacy of those cinnamon rolls wasn't just her successful bakery or her American citizenship. It was the understanding that even in humanity's darkest moments, individual people could choose to create sweetness instead of bitterness.